I'm an architect and master planner, and I'm going to talk about the spatial challenges that London faces in the next few decades. I'm going to look at my view that London first needs an agreed political vision about what it wants to be before you can start talking about the economics and the infrastructure planning, and before you can start talking about employment space, homes, and all those sorts of things. I'm then going to take a canter through some of the challenges and some of the answers, the physicality of the challenges that face London, and then move on with probably an open question at the end about the sustainability of London. Now, I've shamelessly borrowed some images from the internet, and I realize that even this one is a little bit out of date now. Now we have the kind of walkie-talkie on the skyline as well. It's not one of our images, but for me what this shows is is perhaps a view of how bipolar London might become. You know, fun on the one hand, and business on the other. And is there perhaps something that's missing in the middle? And I see now that the liberal press is referring to this as the squeezed middle. And for me, that's kind of not only people, but it's also culture and the very essence of a place. So I see nowhere any debate about what kind of a place we want London to be. What this slide shows then is this is now, in fact, borrowed from the GLA, one of the earlier speakers, about the rate of growth of London. Here is the prediction for the slowest rate of growth for London over the next sort of 15 years. And what I'd like to do is compare it to the Victorian rate of growth here. If you look at the maximum rate of growth there, you can see that's akin to the late Victorian period as well. So it's unprecedented. And what we have is a situation which is quite different from the Victorian time. We can see that the scale of the challenge that we now have in London. Over the past 5 years, we've added Edinburgh in terms of the number of people living in London. Over the next 15 years, we're going to add Birmingham to an already very intense and dense a city. You can see the scale of the opportunity areas, which are where the GLA think the growth in London can happen, or at least most of it can happen. I suspect that those dots are not going to accommodate Birmingham. And there's another element to the challenge that faces us here, is that I think that something like 90% of the brownfield land in London is actually very small. So actually the challenge in providing new homes, and also I think something that gets forgotten, the space for new jobs, is actually at a very small scale. It's not in these dots here. It's actually in the tiny atoms of London. It's that gap site at the end of your street. It is where we're going to have to provide the growth of London. So there's a suspicion that I don't think physically London can, if we assume it's going to grow at that rate, if we take the predictions as read, I don't think London can accommodate it physically. So this isn't a proposition, but this is really just a mathematical exploration of what happens next. So as you go out from London, we have another planning maxim, the green belt. And I think that probably our politicians now, we've got some of the elections out of the way, will begin to explore whether London should expand into the green belt. The last image here shows what happens if you were to use the undeveloped greenbelt land, garden city densities, which are actually quite low, to accommodate growth by 2050. So you could say this is totally unacceptable. You don't want to build on half of the greenbelt, but you could also say that maybe we should build at much higher density, and maybe parts of the greenbelt should be built on. I'm not proposing this, but I think that the point I'm making is that we now have to debate what is the role of the greenbelt. Do we have the shape of our city correct? That then might lead us to talk about green corridors rather than green belts. I think that if you look along the transport corridors, most of the land a bit beside those transport corridors is quite degraded. It's suburban or rue-urban was one phrase that was used back in the 60s. So what I would challenge is whether we should take a look again at the Greenbelt and look at whether we should go to a radial pattern here of development of London. And there's no doubt in my mind that the development of London ought to occur along the transport corridors. This is a system that has been taken up all over the world where you've got increasing globalization. So one message is we have to talk about development close to public transport corridors and close to public transport hubs. I'm also convinced that London, the economic unit, is actually the southeast. And so I think that any devolution debate needs to take that into account, that actually the economic unit is not London, it's the southeast and beyond. And to a degree that's echoed by this next slide. We've got a lot of transport investment going on. I've not seen anywhere really a proper exploration of what that might mean. There are all kinds of planned and unplanned impacts from that coming along. In the days when HS2 is open and running, Warwickshire will be closer to Heathrow in time terms than places like Walthamstow. So what's that going to mean for where people live? And I think this echoes the fact that London's economic growth is now a regional issue, not a kind of local one for London. And clearly you can see here some of these times are going to really change the way that we perceive the country. Now, I think I'm from the area, and I don't like saying it, I think that actually Birmingham becomes an economic subunit of London. Now, earlier speakers have spoken about joined-up thinking. This is Old Oak Common. That's, in fact, the current proposals. Some of you may be aware of our own Farrell's proposals for that area. It's planned to take 1/7 of the new jobs and homes in London up to 2031. Not today it isn't, because that's what's getting built. And so we have to be much, much better at joining up our transport thinking. And then to conclude, and just really to leave an open question, and again, some more shameless borrowing of images. We do have some big challenges in terms of climate change. We've got sort of flooding issues, and I think that they're probably well summarized under the resilience question, well-being, and I think the fact of what is this kind of place that we want London to be, how pleasant is it to live and work in. I think others have touched on the social sustainability element of the growth of London. Thank you.